Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of our free webinars here at AMN Academy. My name is Brian, and I will be uh, your instructor for today. I hope you're having a great time. And if you have any friends and family members or colleagues of yours who would also want to join this free webinar that is being offered by AMN Academy, um, Amen in particular, in partnership with 9.09er, please go ahead and invite them. This is absolutely free. And this is also an opportunity for you to ask questions just in case you have any clarifications, especially about your IELTS, your upcoming English examination. And you know that if you're going to overseas countries, particularly to the US, there's really a need for you to take an English test. And definitely one of those options that you have for your overseas application is definitely the IELTS. Okay, so yeah, we're going to talk about the speaking examination for now. Let me just wait for my presentation to load because it's crashing at the moment. But yeah, let me know where you're from, guys. Just post your location down the message section or the comment section, and let's get to know where you're from. And yeah, good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, wherever you are in the world. Hopefully, you're having a great time, and we're going to also have a very fruitful discussion for this session. Okay, I think my presentation is not properly loading, but I will try my best to just post the content on a different application. Okay, because my computer is crashing for some for some weird reason. Okay, so today we're going to be talking about top tips for the IELTS speaking. You know that when you're applying to the US, one of the most important things that you have to consider is your speaking examination, particularly your performance for the speaking subtest, because it is a major requirement for you to be able to get your visa screen sorted out. And it's actually one that has the highest, I would say, requirement for IELTS among all of the four components of the test. Although you need a 6.5 overall, and whatever score you get for listening and reading, it's not that much of an issue, or even in the writing test. Your speaking examination is definitely the one that you have to pay attention to mostly in the examination, because this is the one that requires the highest potential score. So if you're gearing towards planning to get a band 7 and over in your speaking examination, what are some of the things that you can do? What are some of the strategies that you can employ to get the best results for your examination? So I'll go and start with the first one while I wait for my presentation to load up. The first step that I would want to share with you is to actually not take your examination too seriously and to try and speak as naturally as you can. A lot of people who are taking the examination actually feel that when they're sitting the IELTS, it is actually a job interview and they have to provide the best possible responses in the world to get the best results. And I think this is the problem with many of the candidates, because they feel that this is a job interview and they have to perform, they have to give it their all. There's a tendency for them to sound like they memorized answers. They're a little bit artificial, and examiners can easily tell whether your answers are memorized or your answers are not natural. So it is a normal everyday conversation, not so much an English test, but like a conversation that you're having with a friend of yours, like a family member perhaps that you haven't seen for a long while, somebody, or like a friend of yours whom you actually want to share some of your experiences with, like you want to share a bit of your life, to that person. And that's going to help you to increase your overall performance in the actual examination. If you sound too rehearsed, you will actually look and feel contrived. So it will actually kind of feel very fake when you're taking the examination and you've memorized most of your answers. So probably one of the best tips I could share with you is just to be yourself during the examination. Okay. Now, yeah, right. So we have some people here. We're posting some of the. Sorry, some people are posting their comments. Let's see who are here, and maybe we can also figure out where our audience is from. So we have Wamba from Kenya. Jerome is in the UK right now. Yeah. So how about Linda? Linda is from Nigeria. Guys, thank you so much for joining our session this evening. I really appreciate your attendance. Okay. So yeah, so that's one of the things that I would want to share with you. Make sure that you try your best to be as natural as possible during the test. But what if, for example, you're asked questions that you are probably not so familiar with? And this happens in the examination, in which sometimes you're given a question that you don't have any idea about, like you wanted to answer the question, but you don't have any relevant experience about the question or the topic that's provided for you. Is it okay to be honest in the test and just tell the examiner flat out, oh, I'm not so familiar with this, or like probably just reason out that you don't know the answer? Can you do that in the test? What do you think? Or is it always better to invent answers so that the examiners will think that you're intelligent and somehow able to put something on the table? What do you think? Right? Let me know. What do you think? Should you just tell the examiner, "Oh, I'm sorry, I'm not really that familiar with this," or whatever, and carry on with your answer? Just explain, or is it always better to tell your examiner that you're knowledgeable even if you're not? What do you think? Let me know down the comments section, because this has happened to a lot of our students before. Like, people most of the time don't have the right answers to all of the questions, because you can't expect yourself to be knowledgeable in just about everything and anything. So there are certain circumstances or instances that you're not an expert about the question that's being thrown onto you. What is the best way to deal with those issues in the examination? Okay, so my presentation is not loading. So anyway, let's just use a different presentation. Hold on a second. What do you think? All right, so anyway, the answer to that question is, and the best way is to just tell the examiner that you're not so familiar with the topic, you're not an expert, but it is not actually okay to say, I don't know, let's move on to the next question. um it's not okay to just refuse to answer the question. What I mean to say by this is, you still try your best to answer the question in whatever way you can, but explain, provide a reason or explanation as to why that is your answer, and why you don't know the answer, perhaps, or what you expect to see, what you expect to actually experience in the future, maybe, if you really don't know the answer to the question. Okay, so yeah, just that. Be honest to your examiner. You don't have to pretend that you're always an expert, like you're the most intelligent person in the world. You don't really have to do that. You just have to like provide some evidence of your language proficiency, or provide some evidence that you can speak in English. Because after all, this is not a test of whether you're the most intelligent person. It's not. It is a test of your English proficiency. So long as you can communicate properly with your examiner, and you are able to, in your performance, demonstrate that you have a good range of vocabulary, your pronunciation is okay, you have fluency, and you're making a lot of sense, that is more than sufficient in the examination. Okay, so that's tip number one. Tip number one is always to be natural, be honest to your examiner. Try not to invent anything in your test just in case you're asked a question that you don't know anything about. The more natural and more honest you are, the better the chances of getting the right results in your test. Okay, so let's look at some of our comments here. Eileen is saying, better to be honest. Katrina is saying, I'm sorry, I don't get it. I'm nervous. Oh, okay. So if you don't understand a question, for example, you didn't hear the examiner, or the question is a little bit unclear to you, it is always okay for you to ask your examiner to repeat the question for you. Do you get a penalty for that when the examiner tells you or gives you a question and you had to ask your examiner to repeat it? You actually don't get a deduction for that. So it's okay to ask your examiner to clarify the question just in case you totally misunderstood the question, or probably didn't hear the question properly, and you wanted to clarify. Okay, so that's one of the options. Okay, right. Remember, when you're taking the IELTS, okay, so yeah, I think I have my presentation already uploaded. Um, Another tip that I would want to share with you is your speaking examination is not all about providing intelligent answers, but it is also equally important that you're able to give longer than usual responses. It's a little abnormal because most of the time when you're asked a question, you just want to give a simple response, that's it. But in the IELTS, you need to always make sure to provide reasons and even sometimes examples to further extrapolate your answers. Because sometimes just saying yes or no or just answering the questions directly would not cut it in the test. You have to do a little bit of extra explanation, and you have to try to provide reasons perhaps why your answers are like so. For example, you're asked, let's talk about what you do. Do you work or are you a student? That's actually just a preferential question. So you could just instantly say, oh, I work or I am a student. But what you want to do there is to expand a little, to explain a little. I work as a nurse in one of the hospitals in my country. It is a tertiary hospital, and I've been working here for the past 5 years. I'm currently assigned in the emergency room department, which I totally like because I get to meet new people every day, and at the same time practice my professional skills in dealing with different patients with different life-threatening conditions. And that's actually a much better answer than just saying I'm a nurse or I work. So make sure to always expand your answers in the test. The more you expand, the higher the score you can get. Don't be afraid to speak a little bit more, because especially in part one of the examination, if the examiner has already gotten enough and would probably want to ask more questions, the examiner will just cut you out. You don't want to expect your examiners to always listen to 100% of what you're saying. Like, there are instances when you provided an answer and the examiner just cut you out and moved on to the next question. That's perfectly normal in the test. So just carry on, have the freedom to talk a little bit more, expand your answers, because after all, the examiners will pace you anyway, or will control the conversation by asking you to stop speaking and move on to the next question if you have been speaking too much. Okay, so be a talkative person. I mean, I'm not saying you should be an extrovert or you should change your personality per se, but I'm saying you have to be a little bit more talkative because you're fighting for your life here. I mean, you're gunning for a 7.0 and you don't want to waste your money. It's an expensive examination just because you're too shy or you're too introverted taking the examination. All right. Up next, I would want to share with you the next tip that I find very useful in the examination, and that's using a range of vocabulary. Showing your flexibility, again, flexibility, not complexity, to your examiner is one of the best ways to achieve a higher vocabulary score. Try to use less common words combined with, of course, simple words. But when we say less common, this doesn't necessarily mean idiomatic expressions, high level English words, highfalutin language, or those intimidating terminologies that examiners will not understand, such as jargons or professional language. What I mean to say by that is that you use words that actually describe abstract topics or issues and concretize these with more specific examples to show that you have a good range of vocabulary. For example, when you're asked to describe a classroom or when you're asked to describe your house, right? Then most of the people would actually think of a general description for it, like conducive to learning or probably comfortable, right? These are words that are abstract, they're hard to concretize. So, what you want to do so that you can get a better vocabulary score is to start with those, yeah, abstract things like conceptual things, but go down and try to explore ways to make it concrete. For instance, if you're talking about the classroom being conducive to learning, you can talk about all of the different things you can see in the classroom that is quote unquote conducive to learning. Maybe they have advanced or state of the art equipment or teaching aids, such as maybe smart board and LED screen, things like that. You can talk about the air conditioning in the classroom so that it's comfortable for students and it cools a lot of the students who come into class. You can deal with or discuss something about the colors of the walls, the number of seats inside, the number of students inside. If there's natural lighting coming from the windows, you can talk about the ceiling or overhead lights. If it's bright, you have a bright enough lighting in the area. Things like those will actually expand your vocabulary rather than sticking to conducive to learning, which is just a single phrase. It's not going to help you to get the best results in the test. So as much as you can, try to use a range of different words, like a mix of the conceptual and more concrete nouns or verbs, so that the examiners would know that, oh, you're not just using the same words over and over again, and you're just sticking to just a couple of words that you're using repetitively. For example, in the test, nice is extremely overused. My goodness. A lot of people would just say nice. My house is nice. My neighborhood is nice. My neighbors are nice. It's a nice place to live in. Can you imagine all of the repetitions of the word nice in your exam? So, why can't you talk about your neighborhood being, I don't know, maybe peaceful, or your neighbors being friendly, or your house being spacious, or your community being let's see, maybe organized community, right? Or all of those things basically, or a small community even. You can talk about all of those descriptions, and also a lot of the things that really make it very visual, a little bit easier to understand on the part of your examiners. Because if you just give one word like nice, I wouldn't really know exactly what it means. It's just a generic description of something. So we have to be very selective with the words that we're using to demonstrate that we have a good range of vocabulary. Next, while it is normal for people to just blurt out their answers, they just give an answer right away. When you're asked a question like, do you work or are you a student? It's easy for you to just say work, student. I don't suggest that you answer the question like that. This is not a game show. This is not a quiz. What you're supposed to do to demonstrate your language proficiency. So, one of the best ways to do this is to paraphrase the question and not repeat exactly what the examiner said. Some people even go as far as repeating every single word the examiner said. For example, let's talk about colors. What's your favorite color? And you responded, what's my favorite color? Blue. I mean, that's crazy. Examiners know the question. So you don't need to repeat the question to them. You could just probably paraphrase and say the color that I like the most, or the color that I find most attractive, or even as simple as I love the color green would be better than repeating exactly what the examiner said. So make sure that you exert a little bit of effort paraphrasing the questions when you respond to them. All right. And that's going to show to the examiner that you're in it to win it, that you're really willing to exert a bit of effort to get the scores that you desire. Up next, number 5, and this is very important. There's always a tendency for non native English users like us to speak very fast because English is not paced or configured according to the pacing of our individual languages. For example, in my case, I live in the Philippines, and in the Philippines, most of the dialects and the different um, regional ways of speaking are fast by nature. We don't really talk very slowly in the Philippines. Hardly would you probably hear a native dialect in the Philippines that's slow. So what we're doing is we're accommodating our accent and our way of speaking and the pace by which we talk to our English. And so there's always the tendency to pronounce things fast or to speak very, very fast, and that could be counterproductive in the test because if you're rushing, there is actually greater risk for you to mispronounce. And it would not sound natural if you're not emphasizing important keywords, or worst of all, because you're speaking too fast, your brain cannot process the information very quickly. And what happens is that you pause midway because your pacing is too fast. Your brain cannot actually produce the information or the translation in your head if you're doing some translation right before you start speaking. So it's slower than your speech. And what happens there? You pause, and you get interrupted in what you're saying, you forget things, or you struggle, you sound very labored in the test. So try to adopt a more natural pacing, a little bit slower than usual, not too slow to the point that you sound as if you're exerting so much effort, but slow enough so that you're able to control your thoughts and you're able to deliver according to the pace that's comfortable for you. Also, try to avoid filler words like ums and us excessively. I mean, it's okay every once in a while to actually have some fillers like ums or us. But if they're already being used as connectives, showing that you're really hesitant in the test, this is going to be a big problem in the examination because the examiners would think that you don't have access to the right words or your language is so limited that you're not able to produce anything, and that's why you're struggling. So please try to minimize. I'm not saying eliminate ums and ahs, but try to minimize your filler words in the test. Because is asking, I'm testing soon. Why is my application not acceptable? Oh, this is a question for AMN. Probably our partner AMN would be able to provide a response to that. All right. Yeah. So anyway, let's move on to the next question. And by the way, if you have any questions about your upcoming IELTS, please do ask away because I'm here still to give you useful insights and some answers to your questions, especially for the speaking subtest of the IELTS. All right. Now let's move on to the next one. And yeah, this is something that I always tell students: be direct and confident. Don't give extremely short and indirect answers because examiners prefer confident speakers who answer clearly, especially when the questions are opinion based. There are a lot of candidates who always play it safe and who are very hesitant in giving a strong stand. But examiners don't like candidates who are a little bit hesitant or who are not sure of themselves. So remember, in IELTS, your answers do not matter as much as your English. So what matters in the test is that your English is okay, regardless of the answers. So even if your answers are a little bit dumb, strange, or they go against the grain, you still can get a good score as long as you're able to demonstrate good English. So don't fear that the examiner will not like your answer because that's not even the basis for your score. Only your language proficiency will be the basis for your grade. So, in that regard, try to just give the answers that you feel are very much resonant with your individual preferences, and prepare yourself to defend those responses. At the end of the day, how you explain your answers, how you give evidence that will support your answer, will actually give you a higher chance to pass the test rather than being politically correct or being a little bit safe, or by sitting on the fence. Perhaps these things, these practices will not help you to increase your score. So try to be as much as possible confident with your responses, even if you're not, and try to pretend that you know what you're talking about, even if you don't. And don't be easily swayed by what the examiners are saying. Some examiners might actually show a little bit of aversion towards your answer, but it doesn't necessarily mean that they hate your answer. Sometimes they're just challenging whether you can support your answer if there's an opposite opinion that's being thrown onto you. So, yeah, it's not about your answers, it's more about your English at the end of the day when you're taking the speaking examination. Right. And I think this is the final slide that I have in the roster. I hope that you have been learning a lot during this session. The final slide is focus on pronunciation, not accent. A lot of the candidates who are taking the examination are a little bit scared or terrified that they might get a not so good result because their accent is not native. They don't sound American, British, or Australian, and because of this they feel that they're inadequate or they don't have the capacity to get a good result in the test. Well, here's the news: your accent is not as important as the way you pronounce words. You can have an accent, but I mean, sometimes your pronunciation is not really polished. Like your accent is sometimes even getting in the way of you being understood. If you're a lazy speaker, you don't open your mouth wide, you eat your words most of the time. Then even if you have an accent, a native American, British, or a Canadian, or even Australian accent, you would definitely not score high in your IELTS. So, for you to get the best results, try to talk in a way that you would be understood, focusing more on how you pronounce words, how you produce the right sounds, rather than faking an accent or using a particular accent that might even sound a little fake or phony after all. You don't need a British or American accent. Examiners are more concerned about clarity, meaning to say you're being understood, you're intelligible to your examiners. Secondly, stress. Stress means to say you're emphasizing important keywords. So when you're talking and there's like a word that you want to put a bit more emphasis on, then you're probably increasing the volume or the pitch of your voice to make it sound like it's an important tidbit or detail. And then we also have intonation, like you're using the right intonation patterns. You don't sound flat. You're a little bit dynamic. There are aspects of the of your responses in which, or areas of your responses in which you're increasing your pitch a little bit, or you're sounding a bit more conversational, a little bit more alive, I would say. And there are also some areas in your examination when you're a little bit serious with your responses that dynamics, when demonstrated to the examiner, would actually make the examiner think that you're not faking it. You're really very fluent and you're very familiar with how English really sounds. So again, it's not your accent. I mean, I've seen a lot of candidates with local accent still getting a good result in the test. After all, it's about the effort that you put in. It's about how much you want the person to understand you, even if you have a strong accent. Like opening your mouth, producing the right sounds, enunciating when possible would help you to get a better result than just having a native American, British, or Australian accent. Because again, this is not a test for native English speakers. IELTS is an examination that is intended for second language users, or even people who have learned English as a third, fourth language. and not really for natives. That's why there's a little bit of an allowance for that, and you're not impelled or forced to speak like a native because it's not intended for natives in the first place. Why would you even take an English test if you're already a native English speaker after all, right? So it's not proving to the examiners you can sound and you can write or you can listen or read like a native. It's just that you can use English to a certain extent that could be understood by native English speakers. So I think recalibrating how you perceive the examination is important, right? Oh, here's a question from Sad. What's a dialect? Most British people sound very different. Okay, so we're talking about dialects. I mean, English in itself doesn't really have a standard accent because a lot of people feel that when we say American or British or Australian accent, that means to say it sounds the same. Like when you go to Australia, all people will be talking in the same fashion, but it's not the case because this is highly regional and it depends on where you're actually exposed to English. There are some people who use a received pronunciation of English. Some would use a more neutral sounding English. There are some with nuances in vowels and consonants. So to say that there's really a standard way of speaking English is not correct and it's improper. And because of this, IELTS also recognizes that you have the capacity to still be understood as an English speaker, even if you're using different kind of English accent, and so you can still get a good result in your examination nonetheless. All right, here's another question from Bakita, and I think this is something that will help a lot of our candidates here tonight. What is the best way to develop your answers? Well, let's start first with what's the best way to have answers to questions because before you can develop anything you should have answers to begin with, and the best way to really have answers or to gather insights and information that will help you to improve your answers in the test would be to read a lot, to absorb as much information as you can, to learn about the different topics that could possibly come out in the test, and be a little aware of what's going on around you. This is fundamental if you really want to have answers to questions. You have to be familiar with what sorts of topics are asking the test and so forth. But to develop your answers is a different story. What are some of the ways you can develop your responses? There are plenty of methods we do that. At 9.09er, we provide coaching and we also provide lessons and lectures, sponsored, of course, by AMN Academy. So do sign up. If you're a nurse and or a healthcare professional planning to go to the USA, AMN can help you to achieve your American dream and also provide for you all the support every step of the way so you can get to that destination. And one of which would be providing English preparation for candidates who would want to go to the US and take an English examination. So we do help our candidates by providing for them some tips, advice, and techniques that will help them to not only succeed in the test, but also develop their confidence taking the test. One of those lessons that we teach in our institution is to actually use a variety of techniques to build your answers. I would share with you a couple, but there are plenty of others. One would be to provide a simple explanation, like answering the question why is one of the best ways to lengthen your answer a little bit. And that's something that I've already discussed a while ago. But there are other types of or approaches that you can take to demonstrate that your language proficiency is good and be able to expand your answers without struggling a lot. And those are, I'll talk about two. One, narration or chronological way of describing things. Because when you're talking about a story or an experience that you have had in the past, there's actually a lot more confidence there. And you tend to to have less effort. You provide less effort in giving a response. And number two, this is the last one I'm going to talk about. It's, of course, spatial approach. And spatial would mean to say describing things in detail as if you're seeing things, like in thorough detail, that you're seeing the environment around you and you're describing what you see in your head. So those two things, chronological or more of like a descriptive approach, are a couple of ways by which you can build your answers. But we have a lot, and it is a highly personal thing. What works for you might not work for another person. So it is very important that you find what works and take everything with a grain of salt, because not everything that works for someone would also work for you. And Kyla has a question: how can we organize our thoughts during our speaking exam? Same thing, actually. Those two approaches are very helpful. The first one being chronological. Chronological helps you to organize because, in essence, if you're narrating something, it is already organized. You don't really jump from one point of the story to another point of the story and go back, right? You narrate that from the start of the event all the way to the end. So when you're describing, for example, a wedding that you attended, you don't go and talk about the after party and then go to the wedding ceremony, then go to like the reception. It always follows the sequence in which you start the event with the actual wedding, and then you go to the reception, you do the after party. It's organized in itself, because the chronological approach already kind of organizes things for you. So that's one of the ways by which you could do that. Think of a good story, narrate that story. It will definitely be organized. And another way of doing it would be like the spatial approach, as I've mentioned. We also have like topical. We also have problem solution, cause and effect. We have a lot of different ways of doing it. But again, chronological works fabulously. Spatial also works fabulously. When we talk about something spatial, it's like when you enter a building, what do you see first? And then you go to the first floor, the second floor, the third floor, the fifth floor. If there's a rooftop, what do you see per level? And that already makes your answer a little bit organized, because you're coming from a point or vantage point from outside going in. So that already kind of organizes everything for you. Again, we have a lot of those techniques that we teach our students in class, and yeah, probably you might want to apply to AMN Academy so that you could be also provided free preparation for your English exam with Nair. Sad is saying our teacher used had two times at the same time in one sentence. Why is that? Had? Well, this is actually a tense in English. So you have to just master all of the rules in English and demonstrate to your examiner what English rules you know. Probably the reason that had was used a couple of times is that is it had like two times at the same time in one sentence? Okay, so I understood it right. Had. So let me think of an example of a sentence in which had would be used. Like no, that is actually the past perfect tense. So usually the past perfect tense happens when, or you use the past perfect tense if there were two events in the past. This is a little technical, but like you have a couple of events in the past. One happened earlier than the other. One was completed earlier than the other. So use the past perfect tense for the action that happened before, and then the more recent action that was completed would be in the simple past tense, if you get what I'm trying to say here. So it's not possible for you to use had if there was only one event in the past. So typically use it with a couple of events. So for example, you would say something like, I had this jacket for a few years before I sold it. Okay, last year. Yeah, something like that. Like you had it for some time, and then you sold it eventually. So two events that happened in the past, one completed before the other, one more recently accomplished. It can be very technical like that, but you know what? You don't need to memorize all of the English rules in in the world. What's important is you're able to demonstrate enough language to actually say to the examiner, oh, I know how to speak English. Because normally even native English speakers wouldn't really use very advanced English unless they're writing. Okay. I mean, if one event has completed, and after I think 10 minutes, another event happens, and it can be 10 minutes, a 10-minute gap or whatnot, or it could be an extended gap, but it should be like two actions happened in the past. I mean, you would learn this when you study the tenses. Actually, if it happened 10 minutes apart, then you can just probably use the simple past tense for that because that's a sequence. So that's another one of those nuances when it comes to using the tenses. And past tense is just very simple. A sequence of events that happened one after the other may just simply use simple past tense. Okay, right. And if you're being unsure, or sorry, if you are unsure of your tenses, just use a time marker or a time element to make use of the right tense. So when you say last year, 2 years ago, 10 years ago, that's a very precise time in the past. Just use the simple past tense. Easy as that. It can make your life simpler. You don't need to memorize all of those perfect rules. Yeah. Okay, so that's it for today's class. I hope that you had some useful insights in this session. I hope that you'd also benefit from this lesson from AMN Academy. Thank you so much for allowing me, AMN, to speak today and communicate with our attendees. And hopefully they were able to get some useful tips that they can use in their actual speaking exam. That's it for now. Thank you so much for attending and have a great one. My name is Brian from 9.09er. See you again next time in one of the future episodes of AMN Academy. Bye for now.